Let's kick it off. My name is Oliver Maruda, and joining me tonight is our excellent Mortlach specialist, Emma Cookson from the Whisky List. And we're your hosts tonight to chat about this awesome top shelf distillery tasting that we've put together about Mortlach. Before we jump into Mortlach, I think it's always fun to kick off with a whiskey. Emma, do you want to take us through whiskey number one?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're not going to be dilly-dallying about getting you guys your dram. So whiskey number one is the 20-year-old Mortlach Cowie's Blue Seal. So this is part of their revamp of the brand back in, I believe it was 2018, 2019, somewhere around there. They decided to revamp the core range of Mortlach, which is great because the previous core range tasted terrible. And it was the general consensus of the whiskey community that they weren't great. It was heartbreaking because we all love Mortlach. We're like, but why? Why are you wasting vatting delicious whiskey and making it not taste amazing? So they've rebranded, relaunched, added quite a bit more sherry into the vatting. And now it tastes phenomenal. It tastes like the Mortlach we know and love. So we're starting you off strong with, I think, the second oldest one on the tasting as well. So yeah, so get into that one. Bit of a kind of leads in quite well to talking a little bit about Mortlach. So it's affectionately called the Beast of Duffton. So it's based in Duffton in the Speyside region of Scotland, and it's called that because of its rich meaty quality. It's actually not peated at all, but I've had quite a few Mortlachs through the years that have had that like real savor. You're like, you sure they didn't peat it? But the original name for the town of Duffton was actually Mortlach. So back when it was just an abbey with a village surrounding it, it was called Mortlach Village, but eventually they started proper construction on an actual city, an actual town. And so the old name fell out of use and they started calling it Duffton. So Mortlach was actually the first licensed distillery in the area, which means it beat out such favourites as Glenfiddich and Balvenie, along with Pittyvake and Glendullan and Knievie and stuff like that. So it's the oldest distillery in the town. And kind of similar, I don't know if anyone's been to Duffton. Has anyone been to Duffton? Yeah, it's quite all right, Ollie. It's quite a whiskey hub, similar to Elgin. So obviously you've got Elgin absolutely surrounded by distilleries. And then you've just got this absolute mass of them right in the smack bang in the middle of Duffton. So yeah, so definitely a hive for whiskey distillation. But yeah, Mortlach was founded back in 1823 by a couple of locals. And eventually it came into the possession of the Grant brothers of, unsurprisingly, Glen Grant Distillery. And in quite a sad fashion, they stripped every single thing out of the distillery. They just gutted it, took all the equipment, and left it bare because they moved all of that equipment to Glen Grant Distillery. So the original stills from Mortlach would be at Glen Grant Distillery nowadays. But yeah, and building stayed empty for quite a while. It wasn't until 1850 that new owners took over, and they put distilling equipment back in. They made it back into a distillery, and that was the Cowie family. So that's what this release is named after. It is named after the Cowie family, who really got Mortlach as we know it today rolling. So what do we think of the first one? Obviously, it's quite a big, rich dram, and I will say as well, the ABV, that's a very tiny point. It's not 434%, it's 43.4%. Everyone, no.
I think there is a tiny point in there. It's just the kerning of the letters, the spacing's a bit off.
Yeah.
So one thing I think we should have clarified, and I'll put a picture of all the bottles up. Everyone can see the screen. We're drinking not in the order of the picture, but it's the third one from the left, the one that says Mortlach, giant square label, and that's the part of their core range. Mortlach obviously is fairly new, as Emma mentioned, to the core range. So this is the only original bottling from the distillery that we're trying tonight, and the other 5 are all independent bottlings. Many you can only find in auction houses, or buried at the back of indie bottle shops across Europe and the UK if you're lucky, or calling in some good mates. A couple of these bottles I personally just walked into David Legoff's house and said, we're doing a Mortlach tasting, I want those bottles, and yeah, now we're drinking them, and he's hosting another tasting elsewhere tonight. So he asked us to put a kit aside for him, but thank you for his kind letting us pillage his Mortlach supplies for us to enjoy it tonight. But yeah, this is I was going to do one of the older ones, but I figured this is a top shelf tasting. Let's actually go to the top of the core range. And so I think a nice baseline to compare it against the other whiskies tonight. But yeah, for me, it's very fruity. I think the lower ABV, I mentioned it in some of the in the email comms and stuff. Mortlach has a reputation of being quite a meaty distillery, and we'll unpack that a little bit. But for me, this is very floral, very a lot of apple, a lot of getting rid of, I don't know, cucumber as well.
Like fancy cucumber sandwiches?
Yeah, like when you've sliced it, and I don't know.
Cream cheese and everything. Yeah, I'd absolutely love to hear.
What do people think? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
Thumbs up. It is one of those distilleries, yeah, I agree. Andrew's still very floral for an old dram. It is one of those distilleries that I think, because obviously we talk about sulfur in whiskey, and sulfur is a thing that you don't want. Sulfur is bad. But there's like spirit sulfur and cask sulfur, and I think that this has like so much spirit sulfur to it. That meatiness really comes through, but it's not, especially when you get to that older age statement, like it's not overpowering. It just kind of tends to that like a spring meadow kind of during summer, earthy but florally. Feel free to interrupt me anytime. I'll leave. I'm having a vision of that, what it reminds me of. But yeah, I like that rundown. Good stuff. Yeah, so compared to the 14-year-old, so the other main ones in that new core range is a 12 and a 16. There is also a 14-year-old, which is a more limited but still core. I'm not 100% certain on how they've chosen to portray it. It is definitely one of the more expensive and harder to get ones as a 14-year-old. But yeah. So Andrew, with the 43.4%, is there any significance? I would assume it's probably like the minimum that they need to not have to chill filter in any way. It is, however, a Diageo distillery, so more likely it's going to be a choice for taxation or for whatever it happens to be, where like the tax and the ABV matches with a really great flavor profile. So it's that like that balance between the two. So I'm not 100% certain why they chose 43.4%. I do believe the previous core range was, I think it was about 45% for most of the releases. Tragically, I personally, or maybe not tragically, since apparently they were bad, never got to try them because Whisky Nailment refused to get them in and elected to have the Goren and McPhail distillery release instead. So yeah, Alexander's Way.
Which yeah, is that the Alexander's Way that Ken's been holding up?
Yeah.
Question for the group: who's trying Mortlach for the first time tonight? Anyone here? Cameron, Michael. question: have you ever drunk Johnny Walker? We're amongst friends, like you can tell us the truth.
You're safe here. You're safe.
The good news is you would have most likely, so many people in the world obviously drink Johnny Walker. It's a blend. Mortlach is the body that goes into a lot of the Johnny Walker blends. I can't remember the top of my head which ones. I think it's the green and the blacks. I'm not sure about the reds, Emma.
With the Johnny Walker blend, the two core distilleries are Caowilla and Craigenmore, and then Mortlach makes up a heavy chunk. I believe Clynelish makes up a heavy chunk as well. I think that predominantly Clynelish goes into a lot of the more expensive ones. So the Blue Label has quite a bit of Clynelish in it. But then they do also have those like weird releases, like the Ghost to Port Ellen one, which was actually not Port Ellen, it was just distilleries that use Port Ellen malt. So that would have had Mortlach in it because, as far as I am aware and can find out, they use Port Ellen malt. So it's their own malting house that they own. They don't go through another malting house. But yeah, so I know there's a splash of diluent in most of the Johnny Walker blends, probably not the red. But yeah, Mortlach is a relatively large capacity distillery, not as large as Caowilla, obviously, or Craigenmore, but yeah, so there would be quite a bit of Mortlach, but especially in the higher end Johnny Walkers. No, you could just get Mortlach instead.
Well, Mortlach's to what, 3 million litres per year sort of distillery, possibly more recently if they've done it up. For me, it's interesting when we enjoying single malt distilleries like a Balvenie, a Fide Claire, all designed with the end consumer in mind, drinking that single malt. These big blending houses that Diageo owns, whilst they may have not started that way over the last 10, 20, 30 years, they've designed it to be one flavor and one portion of the Johnny Walker blend. So if one distillery is super fruity or light on the floral, or just like all it adds is the nose or the body or the finish to a particular part of the blending process. So Mortlach is quite a heavy distillate, and I think whilst I can taste a little bit of it, the 43.4% of this 20-year-old, I don't know, I would like to try exactly the same 20-year-old at a higher ABV just to compare, because to me I'm missing some of that Mortlach body, which I'm hoping the second whiskey, when we get into it, starts to see more of its praises. But it's, I wanted to include it just to show that the baseline of this is what the distillery is releasing as its baseline, as a single malt. But yeah, now we can compare it to some of the independent ones where Diageo basically sold a barrel on and they had no influence apart from filling it at the time. I think it's a wonderful comparison. Tastes great with Coke.
However you want to drink it, Howard. However you want to drink it. But yeah, no, I like you said, Ollie, it's a great baseline for what the distillery thinks is their distillery profile, their expression that they want to give out to the world. I do think the second one's going to be very interesting, because I'm sure I'm not the only person who took it out, looked at it, and was like, "Is this just water in my bottle? Is this water?" So let's crack on to the second whiskey now. I'm actually very excited to try this one.
While we're pouring it, you want to tell us a little bit about the Ultimate?
Yeah. So the Ultimate is probably one of my favorite independent bottlers. It's not one we see super often here in Australia. I think there are a couple of people who bring it in, but it's actually a Dutch independent bottler. So they're based in the Netherlands. So the second whiskey is the Mortlach, the Ultimate 2009 10-year-old. So yeah. So they're Dutch indie bottler. They select really unique drams at natural color. They do cask strength and non-cask strength. So this is one of the non-cask strength bottlings. But for them, it's like the whiskeys at the Ultimate bottles are really like, what is this bonkers cask? You know, what is this bonkers dram? I want to put it in a bottle and sell it around the world. Actually, a lot of the barrels from the Ultimate, a lot of the barrels that they acquire are from the Signatory Vintage warehouses. And I do believe that the image on the Ultimate might actually be like a little nod to Signatory Vintage. So obviously Andrew Symington of Signatory Vintage is clearly the loveliest guy when it comes to giving out casks and having people pilfer his warehouses and buy stuff off of him. But yeah, so they do also acquire casks from a couple of distilleries that they work closely with. And they predominantly do a lot of ex-bourbon cask releases. So, you know, they have done a lot of sherry cask ones, but they're really not big on overpowering cask influence. So most of the releases we see from the Ultimate are ex-bourbon cask. So this is definitely ex-bourbon cask. This must have been like the stingiest cask ever in terms of color. Like that cask must have not wanted to give up a single thing, which is why it's so light. All their whiskeys are natural color. It still smells great. Yeah.
For me, that like it's such a stark contrast to the 20-year-old. ABV is similar. Obviously color is clear as, but this is listed as cask strength as well. So something I think so. That's
I will say the one thing with the Ultimate, it's the image on the very far left. Obviously it's not a super fancy label, and a lot of the information on it that they provide, translation isn't always their greatest friend. And there have been a couple of Ultimate bottles where it's like, this is matured in barrel, and it's like, yeah, of course it's a barrel. So it might just be that they copy pasted it, but it might be that, I mean, statistically it's very, very unlikely. I think it's more a typo on the label. Michael, yes, it probably would have been a refill hogshead. I do kind of agree with you, Howard and David. I think that it's like, it probably could have been left in a bit longer. There's this green raw minty thing on the back finish, which is super interesting. But yeah, so like I said, the Ultimate likes to bottle weird shit. They did quite a few years ago, they did a 5-year-old Bunnahabhain that tasted like oyster shells. It was amazing. But yeah, supremely interesting. I will say that this kind of goes into my point about sulfur in whiskey, where you can tell that this is spirit sulfur, like that sulfurous, funky Leo eucalyptus is such a good note for that. It is spirit sulfur because obviously the cask has barely touched that. So yeah, it's definitely that spirity sulfur savoriness coming through that makes that meatiness in the whiskey.
I'm going to be a bit harsh with this whiskey.
Very
interesting, those complex palates, minimal finish, but there's no harmony between the layers, especially coming back for a second and third sip. Like it's like 3 different parts strapped together, stapled.
Yeah,
I don't feel like there's a natural flow between those palate and finish for me. It's a stunning whiskey, and I think it's incredibly complex and tells a story. But yeah, it's just interesting. I did double check. So the Dutch, when they released these Ultimate series, they bottled half the cask at natural cask strength, which is 57.4. It's the other label picture I just Googled, and then they watered it down to 46.3, which is the one we're trying today. But yeah, that's something that they did. I think there's a red cap and a black cap. That's the difference between the two.
I do think that this one probably fares better than the natural cask strength one, because that one would taste even more similar to new make. Yeah.
Shall we look at some photos of the distillery as we kick on?
Mm.
So
yeah,
we said that the beast of Dufftown. Let me start from the top. That's where it's located in this wonderful concentration. So if you ever go to Dufftown, plenty to do. Looks like there is some tours
yes.
that you can.
Check out the clock tower as well. They're very proud of their random clock tower in the middle of town.
Yeah, not only is it a beast of Dufftown because of its the meatiness of the whiskey, it's also just a giant piece of infrastructure. And you can see the people's like townhouses who live nearby. Just dwarfs them. But yeah, this is the way they've been making Scotch at Mortlach pretty much for the last 20 years. Nothing much has changed, I think, since then.
Mm. Yeah, so after the Cowie family kind of rebooted Mortlach Distillery, the family ran it up until 1923, when, like we were saying before, good old Diageo came knocking around to nab it as one of their own for their blends. And yeah, so since 1923, Diageo's operated it and looked after it, and they undertook a massive renovation back in 2014. So they actually just mirror imaged the entire distillery in terms of everything that they had. So mash tuns, stills, all that. So they doubled capacity recently, and I think that's probably why as well we've seen this revamp of the core range, because now they have a bit more liquid to play with. It's probably why we also see more newer, younger Mortlach independent bottlings as well. So yeah, it's definitely a behemoth of a distillery.
I'm not going to take you through the whole distillation process. I just kind of wanted to highlight. So if you go do the tour, not every distillery has this. I quite like it. So everything's labeled. And not only is it labeled mash tun, they explain to you some of the numbers, because I don't know, depending on how good your Gaelic is, some of the Scottish tour guides will say something and you don't have to say grist or I don't know, some other weird Gaelic term, and by the time you spat some numbers and digits and different jargon, starch, sugar, warts, etc., you walk away going, what the hell was that person talking about? Sometimes it's just the nature. So it's nice that they've actually labeled it, but you can see the scale. So this is a 20-ton mash tun. So yeah, just massive in terms of the scale of this operation. There's a few around Scotland that I think have slightly bigger, but yeah, this is quite impressive.
Yeah. Humongous.
On the other side there.
Yeah.
Sorry, Emma, you go.
No, I love they look like little equations. It makes me so happy.
And same thing when you go into the stills and the washbacks and everything's pipes and switches, everything's quite automated now, just because of the volume they're putting out, but still has a bit of nod to tradition, like the red finishes on the wooden washbacks, and then explaining to what the purpose is of it. I think that's quite a nice touch. You can go to so many new modern distilleries and everything's just stainless steel and you have no idea what it's doing apart from there's whiskey or new make that comes out of it. So I feel like they've blended the traditional aspect with the modern automation quite nicely into this distillery.
Yeah. I do apologize as well if anyone can hear my cat being very needy in the background. So what happens when I leave the house.
He's disappointed he's not hosting tonight.
I know. It's too much of a pain. But yeah. So Andrea, I assume that we haven't included the Gordon and MacPhail ones just because A, David didn't have any to pilfer, and B, they're actually quite accessible. And I mean, you just have to look at Gordon and MacPhail's super old releases to see how much Mortlach that bottler has. I think they released a 75-year-old Mortlach recently, or something like that. So yeah, Gordon and MacPhail being the only bottlers to think, yeah, it's World War II, but we're still going to lay whiskey down. And so yeah, they were laying down spirit from Mortlach and spirit from Macallan and other places like that. So
as soon as you mentioned GNM, I love the fact that Ken's just pulled out a bottle. He's got like every bottle in the background there. When we mention it, he's like, here's this one for reference and whatnot. So yeah, accessibility. Been to plenty of tastings. It's more widely available. We could have included it here, but I wanted to. We just had a nice selection of more harder to find stuff, so I decided to mix things up tonight.
Yeah, agreed.
Should we try the next whiskey?
I think we shall. So whiskey number 3, the Douglas McGibbon's 1996 12-year-old. So obviously 12 years old, 1996. It was bottled in, I can't count right now. 2008. Yes, that sounds right. Very bad at maths. But yeah, so Douglas McGibbon and Provenance are actually more recognizable. So that's the second from the left. More recognizable as two kind of separate brands, actually. Provenance is Douglas Lang nowadays, I believe. And Douglas McGibbon is actually better known here in Australia as Clandeni. So if you've seen the Clandeni bottles around, that is the Douglas McGibbon independent bottler. But yeah, the Provenance as a bottling brand has been around for quite a long while. And they have a particular penchant for doing seasonal distillation. So as this one says, it's an autumn distillation. So it means all of the spirit in the bottle, whether it's single cask or a couple of casks added together, comes from a distillation, the same distillation season, as it were. And that seems, relatively innocuous or random, but there's actually kind of a good concept behind that. So when you're running the still as a distillery, obviously it gets quite hot and it gets to a certain temperature in order to distill. If you're distilling in summer, you got to be really careful to make sure that it doesn't overheat and you don't accidentally end up with, droplets and stuff. And if you're distilling during winter, obviously, you are more considerate of the external environment heat around you in the room. So these are factors that we don't really think of when we think of you cook it and then you get the spirit, right? But it is things that they do have to take into consideration. And of course, distilleries here in Australia obviously have to combat very high summer temperatures and stuff like that. So having a distillation season, consciously a season of distillation and when it was done, that can totally affect it. I mean, even in Scotland, the season in which you do something, even like decanting the barrels, that can affect flocking. Whether you need to filter your whiskey at all because it's too cold and it's not going to settle to the bottom because it's bloody -2 degrees outside in Scottish winter, and stuff like that. So temperature and season makes a huge difference on the flavor profile of a whiskey. And it is another one of the factors of magic and mystery that no one can really control in distillation. So
this is a much more complex dram than the first two. There's a tanginess that's fighting amongst the sweetness, really clean nose, all the fruits are up front. It's got a maltiness to it. I'm getting that honey sort of on the finish, very short finish, quite cereally notes, but the tasting note that Leo mentioned before, herbally grassy, I'm getting freshly cut grass, but damp, like after the morning rain or something.
Yeah, I'm getting that real kind of underripe papaya mango thingy, something yellow. Yeah, super interesting. It's very different to the previous one. I think the previous one had so much more earthiness to it. This one's more towards the vegetal kind of side as well. So
even if you have your a bit left over, if you're trying them in different glasses like I am, just nosing number 2 and 3, there's a huge difference in the nose.
Yeah.
You making the nose, Howard, peach in the taste. I think I could be done with one more time in the barrel. Yeah, it's looking very light in color, isn't it?
Definitely that tinned peaches as well, kind of thing. SPC.
I'm curious though if these like they could be second, third, fourth refill. We just don't know what Diageo's profile is, and if they're doing a second or a third refill and then they're selling those casks onto IB markets, that possibly could have what happened, and this is why we got a 12-year-old. I've seen other scotches 12-year-olds are black, so I definitely think it's a refill. I don't know what order of refill is, but yeah, I reckon they've nice bit of extra coin once those casks have been utilized as much as possible. They are floated on.
Yeah, and obviously this would have been bottled just before renovations and such, so like those big renovations. So if that's the thing is have they said, oh, let's offload this because we're about to renovate and we want to curate our warehouse a little bit differently or whatever, or yeah, that's very interesting to see. And obviously the first 2 bottles are very light visually in comparison to the other 4, and I think when we see Mortlach in the kind of in a bar or in a bottle shop or stuff, it is typically has some sherry on it. So I think it's either sherried or it's spent so long in ex-bourbon cask that it's gone full fruity juicy. So yeah, interested to see what we think of the other 3 whiskies.
That's the bottle there, second from the left, the prominence, which has got nothing to do with what we've put the label on the front. The ultimate is buried somewhere on that label.
Yep.
What else can we talk about? The stills. I found this incredibly interesting. When you go to a distillery, you usually have your low wine stills and your spirit stills. One's shorter and wider to just do your first spirit run, and the second one's a taller, thinner one. Potential for reflux, all that sort of stuff. They've got 6 different shapes. Mortlach. So your low wines, and then your spirit stills on the bottom, and each one is different. And I haven't got pictures of all of them, but yeah, as you can see here, beautiful copper stills, but just crazy the size and scale of this place in terms of its process. And each one's, got decent amount of capacity. I think most Aussie stills are like pushing for 5,000 liters stills, like 4,000's big by our standards here, and they've got 6 here in this picture, or 5 they're 8,000 liters plus. So when we're talking about size and scale, and these are all running potentially 24/7 if they wanted to. I think they take a few days off for Christmas, otherwise Mortlach's working year round. But yeah, that's nice bit of copper porn there, if you're a fan of that stuff.
Is that PG enough?
We're 18 plus here at the whiskey list.
Yeah.
What's everyone think of the third whiskey? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Okay, I think that's the most opinionated one. More maybes than yay and nays.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think when we get started on to the next three, I think we'll see a definite uptick in deliciousness. Yeah, shall we pop on to whiskey number 4? The Mortlach Old Malt Cask, 1995 18-year-old. So I think this one's a really good one, despite the fact that there's a large ABV difference. I think that this one is really good to compare to the previous one because it is similar distillation, it is similar casking, it might be more ex-bourbon, less refill, or at least a first fill ex-bourbon. But it has that extra age that I think Howard was talking about. So I think this one will be really interesting to kind of see and compare. And so like I was talking about Douglas Lang before, with Provenance being a Douglas Lang bottling, Old Malt Cask is a Hunter Lang bottling. And if anyone's not familiar with Douglas and Hunter Lang as bottlers, it's a bit of a fun scandal story kind of thing. Two brothers inherited a bottling company from their dad. I think it was Stuart. I can't remember his name for the life of me, unfortunately. But they disagreed on what kind of whiskies to bottle, and they disagreed on how to run the company. So in order to avoid, oh look, it's Big Ollie. In order to avoid an absolute meltdown, they actually divided up the company. So Hunter Lang took certain brands and Douglas Lang took other brands. So pretty sure Douglas and Hunter are not the first names of the brothers, but those are the names that they bottle them under. They are sibling bottlers, as it were. So yeah, Old Malt Cask is a Hunter Lang bottling. Oh, is this 18 or 17 years old? You have the bottles there.
It says 18 on the label. Distilled 95, bottled 2000 and I'm gonna zoom in 13. Yeah, and giant 18-year-old on the front. So maybe they made a mistake if it's just under, but yeah, there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think even on that first sip, you can tell that little bit extra time in cask has given it a little bit more. It's kind of feels like a chemistry equation. It's kind of bringing it a little bit closer to the flavor profile of the first one, the Cowie's Blue Seal, bringing it a little bit more to that floralish side and away from that like earthiness. But yes, I'd love to hear what you guys think of this one. Obviously, as we get older with the bottlings. Buttered popcorn. Ooh, that is a good call. That is very good. That's normally a note I find in Ben Nevis though. But yeah, definitely. Mm.
This has more of that meatiness.
Mm.
I think that we keep referring to. It's I don't know, the mouth feels there. It's oily, it's viscous. The higher ABV, it's not a punch in the face. It's just, I don't know, there's a lot more spice, there's body to it. I don't know, it's just holding itself together really well.
Mm. Yeah.
Thank you, David. That was the word I was thinking of.
Really?
Full of mouthfeel.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's definitely got that like almost like walking through a botanical garden. You know, you've got those bitter botanicals that you smell like angelica and stuff like that, but then you've got the sweeter, softer ones like jasmine and whatnot. Yeah. But that ABV really starts helping, I think. Yeah. Awesome.
What's if we were to do a quick poll around the room, maybe chuck it in the comments, your favorite out of the first four. Let us know what you're thinking.
Ooh. The rod going against the grain. I love it. Yeah, number 1, number 4, and then a few 3s. I think that's fantastic to kind of see that there's still a few people who like into the earthy vegetableness of the Mortlach. McGibbons. I think that's very cool to see. But yeah, so this is a single cask Mortlach as well, bottled in 2013. So yeah, closer to the renovation date as well. But yeah, just very interesting to see. I think, actually, I'm looking at these. Most of them are not heavily sherried as well, which is
so this is a refill hogshead. I've got confirmation on that, and yeah, it is exactly, it's been watered down to 50%, so it's not natural cask strength. I think it would have come out maybe just a little bit above it, but I think they just wanted to get the number of bottles out. But it is a single cask from Hunter Lane.
Yeah, I like Leo's note, the black tea on the finish. I totally agree. I think there's that like little hint of tea leaf bitterness thing. Erin, I think we're all looking forward to the Adelphi. Kind of a little bit why I put it last, but also it's highest ABV, and I think it's one I've actually tried before as well. So I know for a fact that it's freaking delicious. So yeah,
everyone's excited about the Adelphi, but Ken, who already jumped on it.
He's already been there, done that, and ninja to it. Yeah.
Did everyone get their Adelphi, or is it just me who's missing one in their kit?
You've been stinged.
I think maybe that wasn't enough in the bottle. That's fair. Everyone who got a ticket, I get the leftovers, so all good. But Emma, I can't tell you whether or not I like it, so it's all you.
Oh no, I'll have to bring what's left of my sample back up to Sydney with me so you can enjoy it. Yeah, I'm gonna say Ben took it because it's pretty hard for me to take stuff from interstate.
I'm just going to live vicariously through everyone's comments, please. So be descriptive and tell me how is it.
Yeah, Ken's already spoiling it for everyone. But yes, Leo, tea leaf, like all right, this is going to sound really bonkers, but you know in Harry Potter when they're doing the divination and the tea leaves in the bottom, it's what I imagine that like the little leafy bit at the bottom would taste like. And that's my Harry Potter tangent done for today. All right.
It's not an Emma's tasting unless Harry Potter is mentioned at least 3 times.
Harry Potter or some absolutely random. I think let me know what you guys think in the comments. But I'm thinking of collating, like, those book of jokes or whatever, but it's just a book of absolutely bonkers tasting notes. Just like the weirdest things you've heard people describe a whiskey flavor as. I think that could go real well. I will agree, Gandalf. I told my husband, I was like, we should have a Lord of the Rings marathon one night, the extended version, and he was like, okay, yeah, you can't not watch the extended. Anyway, Lord of the Rings tangent over. Shall we get on to the 5th whiskey? We're not delaying the gratification of the Adelphi and also delaying our merciless teasing of Ollie for not having one.
Whilst everyone's pouring the next one, let me just finish off our pictures. So typical bond store, nothing special. Just it's kind of like an industrial version of the Dunnage warehouse on stilts. Barrels piled yay high, just enough time, especially if you're tall, you might struggle. But yeah, and that's just the look and feel of the Mortlach collection. But that's it in terms of our little sightseeing around it. I am very impressed by these copper stills. There's the fact that
really
they've got 6 different sizes.
Stills.
I think it's cool.
Yeah.
Anyways, whiskey number 5, Goren's whiskey.
Number 5. Yeah. So, quick show of hands, who's heard of Goren's whiskey as a bottler before? You, yeah. Few people who might have been on our milk and honey tasting. So, Goren's is an Israeli independent bottler. So Goren actually is part of the team behind Milk and Honey. So when they started the Milk and Honey distillery, they were like, yeah, we'll do this thing. But he in particular has this absolute love for like really, really old or really, really rare whiskey. So Goren decided that he would just, if he can get his hands on a cask and bottle it, it would just be a little side project of his. He really loves like old shit, like especially sherry heavy, but like old school whiskey styles. And so yeah, it's his little side hustle bottling to his gig with Milk and Honey Distillery. So he's bottled some really cool stuff. I think one of the earliest ones that he bottled was a Milk and Honey. I think it was like one of the earliest bottling releases as well. But he's done like a 7-year-old Port Ellen and like 25-year-old Ben Nevis, I think, and a couple of others. So I don't even know if you'd be really able to find Goren's whiskey bottlings here in Australia. I can probably guarantee that this bottle literally was pilfered from David, because David probably got it off Goren. But yeah.
Fun fact is David, before COVID, was invited to Milk and Honey Distillery to showcase Australian whiskey. So he did some tastings there, Starwoods, all that sort of stuff. And then in return, I think he received a couple bottles of these as a little thank you. So it's a refill sherry, vintage, distilled in 95, bottled in 2017, so 21 years old. Bottles 256 or 58, sorry, came out of this, and natural cask strength at 51.8% ABV. So yeah, I think so far we've done a lot of ex-bourbon cask, but it's nice to actually have a Mortlach in a sherry cask here, just to see how the spirit holds up.
Yeah. And I like as well, a lot of the Mortlach sherry casks that I've had they've been predominantly refill. There's not so many fresh ones, but also the way that they take on the sherry flavor, even after a long time, is amazing. Josh, great one. Moorish is such a good description for this. Having tried some of Goren's other releases, I think Moorish is probably the profile that he goes for with his rare stuff. But yeah, if you do see any Goren's bottles anywhere, definitely grab them. They're really, really cool, and a great great little indie bottler. Obviously, Israel is not exactly the whiskey capital of the world, even for bottling. We typically find that France and Germany and Italy tend to have a lot of indie bottlers if they're outside of Scotland. So it's good to see that those aspects of the industry are finding their ways into other countries as well. So
if you do find one at auction, like it'll be at least 350, 400, auction Aussie auction price plus duties, excise, shipping, commission on top. So yeah, not a
Not cheap.
much
You'd
more
be right
in
going
the
to
top
Tel
shelf.
Aviv.
Exactly, but yeah, no, the higher ABV Mortlachs. Obviously, we've just had one before, but I think they tell a better story because the distillate there's harmony in the cask first of all, and then two, just the complexity of flavors. Each sip I've gone back to, it's going from like cereal to fruity to earthiness and a bit of back. Very chewy, very moreish. It's a great dram.
Yeah, I agree with the cinnamon. I feel like it's I don't know if anyone here has had American cinnamon, like Big Red, which is spicy cinnamon in America. It gives me a lot of those like the Big Red vibes as well. But it's, yeah, weirdly Christmassy and not a super sweet saccharine way, just in like a baking spices kind of way. Yeah, Andrew, very easy to drink at 52.
When trying to articulate this, the spice is actually on the front of my tongue.
Yeah.
On the finish, it's like sitting there and lingering for quite a while. It's weird in a nice way.
Yeah. So Michael, are these casks generally matured at Mortlach? Some of them probably would be, just because Mortlach is such a large distillery. But like with the Ultimate, that one probably was from the Signature Vintage Warehouse. The Langs have their own maturing warehouses. Obviously, the stuff from Gordon and MacPhail would probably be matured at the Gordon and MacPhail warehouses as well. But I think specifically for smaller bottlers like Goren, it would probably be coming straight from the distillery if they could get their hands on it.
A little bit of Diageo understanding is because they're such a big business and supply chain so important. Majority of the whiskey isn't matured at their distilleries. They ship it all to these giant centralized warehouses in the UK for just preparing it for their blending. So yeah, if any of these have been pillaged directly from the warehouse, the bond stores on site, great. If not, a lot of these whiskies, especially the ones that end up in Johnny Walker, don't see that, like, they're distilled at the distillery and then they never ever get to go back. And they're basically sent off for bulk preparation, which is fine. That's exactly what they were designed to do. So yeah, I think if there's an indie bottler who gets the casks and get like Signature, like Emma mentioned, or G&M, and they control it 100%, great. If not, maybe it goes to a reseller or a cask broker as a middleman. Sometimes the casks, when they try by Diageo, go, you know what, this is completely the wrong flavor profile. It's sitting outside a bell curve of what we're looking for, and then they get sold off into the secondary cask market. And that's where someone like a Goren could pick it up, where it's matured 100% in Diageo, but then it's only ended up because it didn't fit their flavor profile.
Yeah, and especially with older casks, they're more likely to have come from the distillery rather than have been in the caged pen, as kind of Andrew. I love that, caged chickens versus free range. All those barrels that are slated for Johnny Walker.
You're not wrong.
Chooks. No, I love that. I'm absolutely gonna keep that forever. Free range barrels. Is it a free range barrel? Probably why you pay more for it. But yeah, so older ones will most likely have come from the distillery if they weren't purchased. I mean, Gordon and MacPhail, in terms of maturation forethought, they definitely have very old stock there, but not every independent bottler started that long ago, and not every independent bottler has enough room to mature for so long. So yeah. Alrighty, shall we end the suspense and get on to the Adelphi? Excellent.
Well, while people are pouring it, I've just gone back to whiskey number 4, the Alt Malt cask. It's become, after that sherry, it's become quite medicinal. I don't know, for my own palate, it's very old school vibes of a old Scottish whiskey. A lot more tropical as well.
So it's like weird American candy cane thing to it. Alrighty. So Adelphi. I'm relatively comfortably certain that most people are familiar with the Adelphi brand. Obviously, they've been an independent bottler out of Scotland for a very, very long time. We are, I mean, I'd probably say that we're not seeing as a huge variety of Adelphi bottling, because they're more focused now on their distillery, Ardnamurchan. It does seem to be the trend du jour of having an independent bottling company and really building that reputation, that profile, that name, and then opening a distillery. So we see it now with North Star and Dalriata. You've got Thompson Brothers and Dornoch Distillery, Adelphi and Ardnamurchan. Who else was there? I think Morrison and Morrison's bottlers who do Carn Moor are opening one as well. I can't remember the name because I can't pronounce it. That's it. I think it's like Argy or something like that. I'm gonna, if it looks similar, I'm gonna call it Argy Bargy Distillery forever. But yeah, Aaron, I haven't even gotten to taste it yet.
Head and shoulders above the rest. Oh my God, I'm very
jealous
jealous right now. Why is this not here in my kit?
It's the greatest whiskey I've ever tried, Ollie.
Maybe it's on the, I don't know, I'm gonna look. Don't ignore me.
Yeah, don't. David, don't worry, it's no good. We'll drink to save you the waste of your time. We should have done 6 of these. You mean a bottle? You should have bought a bottle. But yeah, no. Obviously, as everyone can probably taste, Adelphi has such an incredible sense for bottling some amazing stuff. Ooh, Ranjan, you prefer the Goren to the Adelphi? I will say I think like the few more bits of ABV, like that little bit higher ABV, I could have brought it down just a touch, and then it would be like no question over the Gorens. But I think the Gorens drinks really well. Notes of a recent SMW release. I haven't seen a Mortlach release, though. Then again, I don't really keep up with the society. But yeah, definitely best of the most. Fast tonight packs into one. Yeah, I agree. That like
Josh, old school Mortlach, like 2015, 2016 bottlings of Mortlach in the society were some of the best whiskies I think they released in those years. Just reading the stats. So what, this is a 2003 vintage bottle, 2020, 17-year-old, and first fill bourbon of 224 bottles. Yep. 57.6%.
Yeah, so this is that like real old, plenty of bourbon, like offsetting that sulfury, funky, meaty note to it. Reminds me of a Craigellachie. Yeah, Craigellachie does tend to have a lot of similar kind of tropical, floral, salty, sulfury things to it. Yeah, super duper cool. So I'm sure with the poll, I probably don't need to poll everyone on this, but yeah.
Well, I'm going to do multiple choice. So vote. You can pick your top 2. So you obviously can vote for all of them, but just limit it to 2 choices.
Please
so we have some. Whilst people voting, I've just put up the whiskey-based ratings. So out of the whiskies we've just tried, ranked at 87.97 with 42 votes is the Adelphi. And beating it with 32 votes, ranked 88.23, is the Goren's whiskey. In terms of the mostly European-based voters in whiskey base there, but yeah, they've liked the fact that both of them had decent number of people drinking, especially for Goren's because it's such a rare bottling.
Yeah, I mean it's such a great thing to see as well when you've got like a relatively new bottler, super small, just like picks what he likes, and having other people, you know, really agree with it. Leo also loves the Gorens, it seems. Yeah, big fan of sherry matured whiskies with heavy base spirit. Yeah, so I do think there is a bit of a bias with the Gorens being the only sherry one tonight. Well, sherry single cask, obviously the 20-year-old OB has sherry batted into it. But yeah, it is, it's definitely great to try an array of refill and next bourbon cask Mortlachs as well.
Winner, winner, chicken dinner.
Is anybody surprised? No. Not at all. So yeah. So hopefully you guys have when I picked the Adelphi, was a Mortlach tasting blind. Yeah, fair. Yeah, hopefully for those of you who haven't really tried much Mortlach before, hopefully this has kind of been a little peek into behind the scenes of what Diageo wants you to see from the distillery, and really how it interacts, especially in bourbon cask. And I think, you know, even just going back to some of the earlier ones, it smells amazing actually. You know, going back to the earlier spirity ones, yeah, Andrew, great look at the base spirit. And I think that, you know, oftentimes, especially with like rarer bottlings and stuff, we're very focused on older spirit, aged spirit, or like spirit that was bottled ages ago. And I think that this is a really great way to see like the build up from what it is at its core, that, you know, very early spirit flavor profile, to how it really grows in different cask types. And, you know, how it's treated outside Diageo. Any opportunity to try something outside of what Diageo wants you to perceive the distillery as is always a good opportunity. Because, you know, there's certain distilleries, like I said, with the last core range of Mortlach, where you don't buy it. It's not worth it. But like, well, this is a good example. It's not a Diageo distillery, I don't think. But like Fetacan has a pretty average core range, and you only ever grab it as an independent bottler because it's so much better than what the company puts out and the foot that they put forward. So yeah, I do think we've sufficiently FOMO'd Ollie with that Adelphi though. That North Star Fetacan was so good.
If there's one, if one kit, we always keep one just in case. So I was post loses one. If there's any left in the warehouse, I will be raiding it tomorrow. Overall, everyone enjoying these top shelf tastings still? Enjoying the distillery verticals that we're diving in? Want to see what one of the next ones are that I've just secured some very cool bottles, like this afternoon. I will give you a hint. Maybe people can see the.
It's a really terrible hint.
So sorry for the glare, but yeah, I'd beg next. We got almost there. Galileo, always a fun one to snap up. What else did I pull out? This is actually really cool. I had no idea that they had this. There's a Ugadale version, but it was bottled for a specific year. I think it was 2018 or something. So it's like an actual vintage of the core range. Ardbog, always fun.
It's going to sound so terrible, but I'm not. Ardbeg is not one of my favorite distilleries.
And then Supernova and maybe a few
Right.
others. Well, Emma, lucky for you that David is.
David's going to run it.
David's a huge fan of the bag, so he will happily give you a night off. What else? We're going to do a couple Isla verticals. I'm putting together a Brooklady, Octomore, Lockendale, Port Charlotte tasting.
Yeah.
There's that Leadsheg one that I keep hinting. Ben Rinnes.
Yeah.
A bunch of other rare old whiskey bottled in the UK. We're just going to keep doing these top shelves because it's a fun chance to crack open some bottles that I don't think even if you do sitting on your shelf, you're not always willing to justify the crack it open, but it's nice to try with some friends and have a discussion here.
Yeah. Essentially, we're all funding Ollie's habit of buying really cool bottles and justifying him being able to open them because we share them.
They're all being opened one way or another, whether we do these tastings or not. We'll get into them, but it's better Islas out there than Ardbeg. Well, lucky we were up a Bunna, and there's Lagavulin. Lagavulin is one I want to do. It's just finding IBs at affordable rates today. It's very scary.
Yeah, especially since a lot of them are like secret Islas, like they don't talk about it. But
yes, thank you all for joining us tonight. Any other questions? Throw it through into the chat. Otherwise, we'll see you at the next tasting. I think we're about to launch a whiskey sponge tasting as well, something new stock that just landed today as well. So plenty of tastings, and we'll see you at the next one. Otherwise, bid you all a wonderful night. Thank you, Emma, for your time as well.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Such a lovely, engaged crowd. You guys are all wonderful.
You're my favorite.